What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. It's not a tagline, it's a reality. And this is a show so good it happens every Friday. Great Scott, it's your true crime Phil. Best guests, America's most respected and well-rested detective, Fil Waters. He spent decades in law enforcement amassing a lot of money so he could get a place in Hawaii where he is right now, becoming an expert at criminal confessions. Spent 23 years working as a homicide detective in the trenches, investigating over 400 cases. He is a Marine and the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations and the star of the show, The Interrogator. God, I got to become a law enforcement agent when I'm older. Coming from his other beach house, the other beach house is Scott Duffey, FBI agent, former FBI agent out of the Wilmington office. He handled all kinds of crime matters, gangs, bank robberies, fugitive task force cases, you name it, he did it. And prior to that, he spent 5.5 years in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as a PA police officer. Quick reminders. Facebook, Insta, Twitter. I will start to post more and more pictures on Instagram. Someone sent me, Michelle sent me from South Africa, a picture of Detective Waters in a full suit and tie for a TV appearance. You notice on my show, he comes in a Hawaiian shirt, a little more casual. And Michelle said, don't worry. It's not that he's not getting dressed up. He's just being the real Phil with you. So I will let Phil address that. I put show times out at Podcast STS. You can become a Patreon or YouTube member. The merch store is open and linked. So, Phil, as has become a tradition, what is this Hawaiian shirt that you're wearing today? And did you get your nap in? And did you go surfing today?
Well, it's only 11 o'clock in the morning here. So I had a very restful sleep last night and got up and just doing what I normally do. I open the house up and look at Maui and look at the ocean and look at the horses. And I have my bull Browning, a white-faced Hereford who's in the pasture next door. And
when was the last time you scratched that horse's chinny chin chin?
Yesterday.
Very, very.
I was out working the North 40 and was out doing my mowing. We've got almost 2 acres. So I was out on my second favorite vehicle to drive, my Skag, and a 0-turn lawnmower. So I was out there on that and doing a little weed eating and trimming back the palm trees. And so it was a good day.
By the way, you said the North 40. There was a famous football movie, North Dallas 40. I bet you've seen it.
And yes, many times. Yeah, that was kind of a play off of the Dallas Cowboys, which was my and continues to be my favorite football team since I was a wee little one in Oklahoma.
And Scott Duffey, before we get to the business at hand, you've got that beach sign behind you. You're going surfing this weekend to keep up with Phil or what?
No, I am not. I'm not a surfer. I'll put my feet in and that's about it. I just enjoy watching. And of course, there was a surfer a couple of days, just 4 miles from where I am now, who got attacked by a shark.
I heard a horrible story last night. A woman just graduated, I want to say Yale University. She was swimming in Turks and Caicos this week or last week and had her foot bitten off by a shark. And she was a avid marathon runner. So that's why I am watching from a distance as well. There's many, many sharks in Miami. That's their land or their water, not ours. So anyway, we're already way off topic, but it's good to see Ketchup back. Bonjour and Gruze, if I'm saying that right. STS Nation best guess. My head is still in the Swiss Alps. Look, everyone's living a rough life. But thought I'd pop in for my favorite duo. Missing this amazing STS Ohana for sure. Stay brisk. Ketchup was traveling the world. Phil, yes, sir.
I I have been to Switzerland on few or many occasions and love it. In fact, even considered having a dual citizenship in Switzerland. And I have a friend of mine who is a contemporary. He's a retired homicide detective with the Zurich State Police. And still in communication with him. As a matter of fact, he's doing what I do in Switzerland now. And I am at the present working a case for him. So Switzerland's a beautiful, beautiful place. It is the other side of God's wonderful creation.
A little known fact about Joel. I grew up going to Switzerland because after World War II, my mother's family moved to Lausanne, Switzerland. And I used to visit my grandmother every summer on Lake Lake Geneva. And there would be swans in the lake. It looks like a postcard with snow-capped mountains. It is beautiful, but
it is.
Good old Carm is not very fond, I probably shouldn't say this, of the Swiss people. She doesn't find their personalities to mesh with hers. They're a little too stoic for her.
Well, it depends on where you are.
That is true. That is true.
Because northern Switzerland is the German influence. Western Switzerland is the French. The eastern side is and north and south is Italia. So and then they speak all those languages, plus they speak Romanish, which is the Swiss language. So but they are very efficient.
They are very efficient. You can eat off the ground. And my grandmother lived right across the lake from Evian, as in the spring water.
Very efficient, yeah.
We should try to do one of these shows without doing any crime. We could just talk about nothing. But let's get on to the matter at hand. And by the way, we're going to be speaking a lot of Kohberger today, the evildoer, as Phil calls him. So when we do that, I do like to remember the victims. We've got Madison Mogan, of course, 21, Kaylee Gonzalez, 21, Zana Kernodal, 20, Ethan Chapin, 20. Let us not forget them as we are discussing this. Quick shout out here to some other Dog Mama's watching. Hello, STS Nation. Tali in Israel. And then Laura Waldy, favorite episode of the week. And Sarah, who is always on now, connected to Elvis in an odd way, coming to us, I think, from Nashville. And my favorite person, Shaquille Oatmeal, not my favorite person, but my favorite name, possibly my favorite person. And then we've got Marina, of course, in southern Spain. So there actually has
my adopted daughter again.
I saw her. Abby Taha, make yourself known if you are here, but hopefully we will see her as I scroll down. Brian Kohberger, the evildoer. There's some interesting news that I didn't quite understand that I was hoping you guys could help me clarify in my little pinhead. And that is Brian Kohberger's parents, Michael and Marianne Kohberger, were just called this week to testify in front of a Pennsylvania grand jury, Scott Duffey, your old neck of the woods. There's a woman named Dana Smithers who disappeared in May 2022 and was found dead about a year later in the woods. She was last seen at a friend's house in Monroe County and was found in Strasburg near the Poconos, Scott Duffey, which is not far, just a 30-minute drive from Brian Kohberger. Apparently, he has an alibi for this time period, but why would the parents be subpoenaed by a grand jury if reportedly he has a very strong alibi in this case? Can you, I don't know, can you come up with a reason for why they would be called in?
Yeah, from what I gather, it's an investigative grand jury. So it's put together it's on a fact-finding mission, swear people under oath as opposed to going to people's different houses or places of work, interviewing them, taking a police report and filing, etc. So the investigators here, from what I have read and gathered, that put together a investigative grand jury panel and does some fantastic work with regards to getting information out of people. It puts them under oath. It puts them on the spot. There are penalties for lying to a grand jury. So it is a very effective tool to getting information that is needed. So with regards to the parents, and I imagine there are others as well that are close to him that are being called. So usually you don't put somebody in front of a grand jury before you have interviewed them. And so it'd be an informal or formal police interview. You get the information. Perhaps there's some discrepancy, and so thereby put him into a grand jury and put it on the record. So it's a very effective tool, and that's why they they're going to provide whatever information they probably already provided to law enforcement investigators. And it's very possible that the information that was provided, and with that being a strong alibi, if that is what they were interviewed for, and that being Kohberger being at least a subject of as a possible suspect, and so thereby they want to rule him in or rule him out, and you do that shy of putting the suspect on. You put people who have relevant information that could be used as evidence, and thereby rule them in, rule them out, and no better way than investigative grand jury panel.
Fil Waters, I think Scott Duffey did an excellent job of answering that, but there's some more information. So as I said, she went missing, was found about a year later in a wooded area not far from Brian Kohberger's home. As I said, about a 30-minute drive. But the Stroudsburg Police, otherwise known as the Stroud Area Police Department, said that investigators discovered zero evidence linking Brian Kohberger to Dana Smithers' death. And the quote goes, the SARPD has no evidence that Dana Smithers' disappearance in any way is tied to Idaho murder suspect Brian Kohberger. They put that on their Facebook page. He has apparently a strong alibi. That is according to a local Pennsylvania station, WBRE. So what is your thinking behind all this? Someone told me it could be a ploy to get information that the Idaho state attorneys could use. But what's really going on here, Phil?
I don't think the grand jury was put together and had the parents there for the purpose of the missing woman that was found. That may have been a dual. There may have been some duality, but my understanding is that they put together this grand jury that is, I think I read where it is consistent with Idaho law, and the questions that were being asked and so forth and so on were all related to these four beautiful young people that were slaughtered in Idaho. So I would imagine that the parents, I'm not imagining, I know that the parents were interviewed, that there were certain things going on inside that house that was in question about the parents' involvement in what I would imagine they are looking at is possible tampering with evidence or obstruction of justice. So I think that is the main thrust behind this convening a grand jury, is directly related to the case in Idaho.
And Phil, when would we, if ever, find out what this was really all about?
Well, the grand juries are secret. They're confidential. And I don't know that we will ever find out about what actually went on in the grand jury, except for the fact that at some point in time, if the parents are not charged with something or indicted with something related to the Idaho investigation, then I would presume that there was no evidence that the grand jury saw that would bring about an indictment, as I've said, for tampering with evidence or obstruction of justice.
Which in an odd sort of way brings us to Sarah's question here. She asks many questions, which I love. She looks like she's wearing like an Olympic ski hat in this. She looks like an Olympic skier. That's what I think of when I see this photo. Scott Duffey, do we know or have you given any more thought to why Brian Kohberger's dad drove him all the way back instead of the evildoer just taking a flight? That is question number one. He also took a circuitous route, and I had some high-level law enforcement officials. Now, the FBI, year-old agency, has denied making those traffic stops along the way. But the law enforcement people that I spoke to said that was 100% the FBI behind that. They were stopping him to check on him. They're just denying it publicly. But back to Sarah's question, have you given it any more thought as to, because Phil was just talking about were they tampering, were they involved? Do you think the father knew something more than what we are being led to believe right now?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard anything that would lead me to say something that would indicate the parents knew anything beyond just being parents. And I understand, you know, the questions now that we have investigation and a charging of Kohberger in these 4 homicides, but you know, we don't know enough about the family dynamic. It's possible that they've taken trips and this is just another reason. Hey, since you're already out in Idaho, I guess, or Washington, I don't know what airport the father would have flown into, but there's not enough to know about the dynamic of what, maybe this is a cross country trip. Hey, since we're already out there, I'll join you and we'll drive back and see the country. I mean, it's I have quite a few friends who have made trips that I would probably not have made, but have made these fantastic cross country trips, and then another family member fly back. So eh, maybe it's a little bit early reading into other than just a family, seeing the country. But it does beg the question, what, and so it makes it all the more difficult for law enforcement because now you have many ground to cover for law enforcement to try to see was anything thrown out of the car, was anything deposited in a trash can or anything. So it does give a lot more for law enforcement to chase down as opposed to just jumping in a flight and being locked in an airplane for a couple hours.
And Scott, are investigators looking at all those receipts, ATM withdrawals, all that kind of stuff on the way back to see where they were stopping and what they were doing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I would imagine having grabbed surveillance video just to see if there's anything that stands out as opposed to, stopping at a rest stop, picking up some food or whatnot, but seeing if something is taken out of the car, if it would it pick up on some sort of clothing, whatever, that can just be another piece to the puzzle. There's a, as Phil and I have said early on, that the investigation was just getting underway, right? It took a lot to get to where they got to charge Kohberger, but now imagine having identified and arrested him, and being able to now go overt as opposed to covert, the amount of interviews and surveillance videos, et cetera, to continue to solidify their case.
And by the way, we're going to go a little heavy on the evildoer today, and that's because last week there was that Dateline episode, which aired after we had Scott and Phil on. So a couple of things about that I want to talk to them, but we will get to some other cases. First, you will hear my Spanish. Terapia de Encuentro con Claudia Lagunes. So happy to catch you live. Hello from Mexico City. I have not been to Mexico City, but I hear it's amazing, and I would like to get there. Who doesn't? Dom's mom says, I want to be where Phil's at. Of course, we all do. And by the way, Dom's mom, 725. That's my birthday, so I remember her name, 725. Sensory Combustion, woohoo. Getting my fill, Great Scott Duffey, standalone best guess. Most important question of the day, without question, once again from Sarah the skier. Where is Nugget, Phil?
She's right here.
Bring her over. We have to see her.
Napping on the couch.
Now, don't wake her up. Then don't wake.
She's asleep. Yeah, she's asleep.
Let Nugget sleep. Okay.
If she appears here, I will bring her into the picture.
Please do. Please.
Let me make a comment about.
Please do.
The last topic here. Look, we need to remember, number one, that they were coming back in the evildoer's car. And I don't recall or remember if we were told that either he asked his father to come out there and drive back with him, or his father offered to do that. But however, whatever way that went, I have no doubt that the evildoer planned that, and the kind of route that they took, which is kind of a roundabout way to get there, I think in the evildoer's mind was to find out if law enforcement was onto him. And then he gets stopped within what?
It was 10 minutes.
Yeah.
He had 2 stops within 10 minutes.
Yeah. And where was he? In Tennessee?
Indiana. I think it was Indiana.
So never believed in coincidence. Certainly don't believe it now. I would find it, having worked these kinds of cases with the FBI, I would find it almost impossible that once they had him identified as the possible suspect, they were on his phone, tracking that phone everywhere he went, and that's how they knew to get him stopped when they wanted to stop him. Now, I don't know what the strategy was or what the tactic was about getting him stopped and then stopping him another time. I don't know what that was all about.
Yeah, because doesn't that seem very close together? I mean, it almost seems too obvious.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if and he was stopped, according to the Dateline show, he was stopped because he was following too closely in traffic.
Yeah.
Which,
when's the last time you heard that? Yeah.
Really? Okay. So I that whole business there, to me, that would have been what I would be doing in surveilling this guy through the phone, and then getting eyes on him to verify that it is in fact who's in the car. And so who knows? It may have been the troopers were set up in such a way that one got him stopped and then cut him loose, and then the other trooper decided he was going to pull him over, or he was let's pull him over and see if he gives a different story or has a different reaction. I mean, who knows what the tactic was, but the denials, I find that a little suspect.
Sandra Watkins. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm glad to have found this channel and have been binging on videos. Scott Duffey, who worked narcotics, will tell you it's a much better addiction than crack cocaine. So you're in good hands, Sandra. Keep it up. Hello from Louisiana. Another interesting development in just the last day or two. The families of 2 of the victims of the Moscow murders, quadruple homicide, have filed notices reserving the right to sue 4 government entities surrounding the crime. It is the Mogan and Gonzalez families. They basically gave notice, I guess, to the city of Moscow, the University of Idaho, and the Idaho State Police, as well as, according to ABC News, sent a notice to Washington State University, that they have this right to sue. Fil Waters, you're not an attorney, but you spend a lot of time with them. What does this mean?
Well,
Fil is frustrated over this one.
I work a lot of premise liability cases where someone gets murdered in an apartment complex or in a store, in a shopping mall, whatever. And then the family of the victim will turn right around and sue the property owners as though they had some sort of, and the basis of the lawsuits are usually foreseeability and negligence. I would have to presume this is a similar type instrument that the families have said they have a right to do, or making it known that they may use as an option. And it's just disturbing to me. And when I've worked a lot of these cases, and it comes across as we're making a payday off of a dead loved one. And I don't get it. I guess I kind of understand it, but we have in this case, we have the person who is believed, who is alleged to have done this. He's been charged, he's been indicted, and a measure of justice. This is what I would, this is the only thing I could promise families, that I would do everything in my power to find the right person who's done the wrong thing. And in getting that person in custody, getting them charged, getting them convicted, would, in my hope, would bring about a measure of justice and would bring about some peace for them. And this going beyond, trying to achieve those things by going beyond letting the system work to filing lawsuits to try to get some sort of monetary compensation, as though that's going to make you feel better. I mean, I don't subscribe to that philosophy. I don't even understand it.
I mean, is there also, by the way, I did some research. So not all tort claims become lawsuits. It's just a legal filing in response to one party breaching the duty of care owed to another person. Scott Duffey, I mean, are they going to just make some sort of claim that, Washington State University didn't have enough security? I mean, it seems like, maybe with, Moscow, the city of Moscow, there's some argument to be made with the police department, even though I don't know, and I'm not a lawyer, but, that's
the problem, John. I don't mean to interrupt you here, but that's the problem with this stuff. They base these lawsuits on what is known now, not what was happening at the time.
Correct.
So my job when I go into these lawsuits is to look at that objectively, like I work a homicide investigation. I walk in there open-minded, objectively. I let the evidence lead me where I need to be, and it's always a journey for the truth. And unless there is something that is by the property owners or the PDs or the university, if there's something, they're going to have a long haul to go to say that somehow that the administrators at Washington State and the Moscow Police Department were supposed to have some crystal ball that would have been able to give them the ability to foresee something like this happening, and then their response to it was negligent. I tell you, it's sad. I mean, it really is. I'm saddened to see that they've gone this route.
But that is an interesting distinction that Fil makes, Scott Duffey, that they are looking through the lens of things now, not as it was. Scott, I mean, was there any way for Washington State University or University of Idaho to really prevent something like this? And what do you think about this legal tactic? But before you answer that, Jody wants to know, is Scott wearing something special? Are you trying to compete with Fil Waters? Do you have, it's tough to tell. Is that just a beach shirt there? You're getting ready to go party tonight or what?
It is a Tito's vodka special button-down shirt.
Oh, that's what he's going to go do. By the way, Scott, I totally picture you as like a total water guy, like surfing, like the wiry guy, wild in the water, like on your whatever.
Yeah.
But you're telling me that's not the case.
No, definitely a beach guy, not a surfer.
Okay.
Just haven't tried it. I it's nothing against it. Just haven't. I
feel like with your sinewy, wiry body, you might excel at this. So maybe give it a shot. But what about these claims, these notices that they're filing that they might reserve, or they are reserving the right to possibly sue here?
Yeah, I 100%. It's very sad, and going after, especially at this juncture, we're very, very early into the criminal court stages, the criminal justice stages, and notices like that, it just puts a bad taste in everybody's mouth. So, I also would say, because I've seen this happen in the past, and to me personally, in some cases, you do have attorneys that look for vulnerabilities, and so, I would say there are attorneys out there, and they're probably in line trying to take advantage and put the blame on somebody who has deep pockets, and government has deep pockets. So unfortunately, no, and to answer your question, I don't think anything could have been done. This it seems like so far what has been disclosed with certain vehicle stops and the university addressing some issues with him as a teaching assistant, it just sounds like people were doing their jobs. Law enforcement stopped, and those things ultimately help, but they are just stops. There's nothing they can see. As Phil said, nobody has a crystal ball to say, oh, this is a future killer, so let's put him behind bars. There's nothing like that exists. And from what I've seen in the videos, he's very meek and mild, not combatant to the law enforcement stop. So no, I could not see for a second anything that anybody between the law enforcement or the university could have done differently with any of the interactions they might have had with him prior to, just to have changed anything. No, definitely not something that I would see to be brought into a lawsuit. So it is mind-boggling.
Both Scott and Phil do not understand these claims, but we'll see how they proceed. Northern Ireland nincompoop. Scott's looking jazzy. I love that. This I've not heard at all, so forgive my ignorance. Julia P., please comment. Is that a white Elantra on the Ring camera that Dana, this woman in Stroudsburg, is getting into? Either Phil or Scott, are you aware of this? I have not even seen that Ring camera footage. They are both shaking their head no. And then someone else says that Dana disappeared on the date of BK's graduation from DeSales University. So maybe we haven't heard the entire story here. I'd be curious to see that Ring video, which I have not seen. And I mean, if she's getting into a white Elantra, I guess that could, I don't know. I mean, Phil, that would raise your eyebrows or no?
I don't know. I've never heard this before, and I'm not going to comment on speculation.
But Ash is going to comment on Scott's shirt, as are a lot of people. Looking hip with his cool print shirt and soul patch, STS rocks. I only have cool dudes on my show, as you can tell.
You didn't have Scott. You don't have a bong or anything in the background there, do you? Okay.
No, I don't.
Just checking. Just checking.
He's former FBI narcotics guy. There's no bomb there.
No, I am in New Jersey.
Hey, look, I collect when I worked narcotics. I collected some of the paraphernalia just as a museum piece. So,
sure,
you know.
Phil. So Fil Waters, this trial, the judge, by the way, had a very hard time saying the victims' names, which people took issue with. But he set a trial date for October 2nd. Trial is expected to last 6 weeks. Do you think there's any way in heck that this trial starts October 2nd? And the state now is on the clock, 60-day clock, to notify whether they're going to seek the death penalty. What say you? Will this be a death penalty case, and will that ultimately push the trial date back? Fil Waters.
Well, I think it will be a death penalty case. If there was ever a poster child for the death penalty, he's it. So I would think they would pursue the death penalty.
Phil, now I can already see the hate mail, and the people are going to say to Fil Waters, you're a police officer. There's a presumption of innocence in the United States of America. How dare you say this? What's your response, Fil Waters?
Okay.
I'll
tell you what, I put 9 people on death row. 4 of them have been rehabilitated. And I can tell you from my own experience that every one of them deserved to be on death row. And I have no problem commenting about a defendant who has done something so horrific that the death penalty is being considered on. So I'm a pro death penalty guy. Let's those people that are convicted for doing a horrific act under the laws of whatever state that they're in that has the death penalty, too bad for them. They earned what they got.
And as we know in Idaho now, they're having trouble. It is a death penalty state. Trouble getting the injection. So now they are talking about a firing squad, which the governor signed off on. So
that's awesome.
It could be ultimately be the evildoer's fate. Now,
and it's cheaper.
Probably a lot cheaper. Loving Phil's shirt today from Baby Doll. So Anne Bremner, she is a very high-profile attorney, and because she's so high-profile, we get her on Surviving the Survivor out of Seattle. She was asked about him standing silent in court this week, which I'm about to ask Fil and Scott about. But she said in response to that, Anne Bremner, this attorney says, as I understand it, he's pretty obsessed with his own coverage. So he's going to make a statement by being silent, and he's going to watch that too. He's getting his PhD. I don't think he had gotten yet, but he obviously knows a lot about criminology, and he's probably lawyering more than he thinks his lawyer knows, and he probably thinks it's some kind of strategy. Scott Duffey, what did you make about the fact that, there was this high-profile court hearing that was on a video delay that we all saw, and he, I guess, invoked a constitutional right to stand silent, and the judge had to enter the pleas from an investigative standpoint, from a guy that dealt with criminals. What did you make of that?
I think he's listening to his lawyers. Here's a chance to be recorded because you're in court. So I would think he might have been biting his lips, and I'm sure he wanted to, but at the same time, a good lawyer would tell their client, say nothing. No interviews, don't provide anything other than yes or no or this or that. So I would think his attorneys have just cautioned him to take that, remain silent.
Fil Waters, do you think he was listening to his attorneys, or do you think he's playing games already and was instructing them that he was going to stand silent?
Well, his attorneys would have responsibility to offer him the options. And this is the first I've ever heard of a stand silent at a plea that they have in Idaho. I've never heard such a thing, and if it exists in Texas, I've never seen it. And I think that was just a strategy that, we heard months ago that his attorneys were saying he's going to be, or he said that he's going to be exonerated. So in keeping with that type of mindset, I'm not surprised if given the opportunity to remain silent and the judge has to enter the plea for him. I think that's consistent with the evildoer's attitude about this. The one thing I noticed that was kind of compelling and just watching him in the interaction with his attorney and watching him come into the courtroom and so forth and so on, a lot of jaw clenching, a lot of tooth sucking. He kind of looked at his lawyer at one point and gave a little kind of a fake smile, emoted a little bit that didn't appear to me to be too terribly sincere. And then I think that they've still got him wearing body armor.
What's the jaw clenching and the tooth sucking, which I'm afraid I'm going to do in front of you right now? But what does that tell you when you see that?
Well, I'm sure a lot of it just has to do with nerves, and I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's about to remain silent. He's not even going to stand up and be a man and make the plea on him by himself. So I think a lot of things are going on in his head, and he's waiting for that moment when that comes across, and his body is reacting to the setting that he's in at that time, knowing what he is going to do. So the appearance to me was that he was getting himself geared up for that moment for the attorney to say he chooses to remain silent. So there you go. But again, back to I thought it was interesting. The overall picture was it appears to me that they've still got him in body armor, which I think is pretty interesting.
Phil, speaking of standing silent, this is something I'm thinking of. What would you do in an interview room? I was about to say interrogation room. When the person you're interrogating gets silent, do you soak in and revel in silence because it makes the other person a little uncomfortable? What do you do when someone becomes silent? Do you keep the conversation going, or do you allow silence? Is my question.
I might take what I would refer to as a pregnant pause, but silence is not your friend. You do not want them to be able to have the ability to think. And when they go silent, if you're just going to sit there and let them sit in silence, well, those wheels are turning. You don't want that happening.
So you keep them going. Very interesting.
I would continue to. Now there may be a moment, like I said, I may initiate a pregnant pause because I want them to think for a moment there, a little longer about what I've just said. But then once that moment is over, then I'm back into the dialogue with them, and that's a matter of timing and experience of sitting in that room, of knowing when to end that moment of silence and start getting back into the conversation. You want to continue to speak with them and jumble their thought process up.
I always feel like I'm in trouble when I'm talking to Phil. Amanda, to you, Phil, just in case you're missing your home state. Hi, guys, from Temple, Texas. I love y'all's show. So there you go. This
Awesome.
is interesting here. From Stuffed Banana. I think Brian Kay was trying to plant a seed in his dad's head that the soldier, remember the story with PTSD that was shot by police, I think at Washington State University or right off campus, was involved with the murder of the 4 college students, just putting it in his head. Maybe that's possible. Who knows? Someone's asking me to translate that what I said in Spanish. I have no idea what I said. I can just read it. That's all. Scott Duffey, you first, because I know what Phil says about this, but they're going to reassess this media gag order on June 9th. The judge had some pretty harsh words for the media in the courtroom. My hunch is there will be some sort of pool feed on delay, but again, Scott, good idea or bad idea to have no camera? Phil says he's fine with none.
For the actual court, any court proceeding, is that?
I'm talking for this case specifically because it seems like there's going to be a pool camera, but it's not going to be a live feed or anything.
Oh, yeah, no, I've come to enjoy the camera in the courtroom. I absolutely see a lot of negative. For example, I've seen some acting and are you really worried about how you're saying or what you're saying for the sake of the camera and who's viewing it, as opposed to the only person that should, or the only people that should be you should be worried about is the jury, right? And so, but I do enjoy seeing the camera in the courtroom, and if it's put in a place where it's inconspicuous and you're not looking at it and then you forget about it, I think people can take a lot from watching the courtroom, and there's a lot to be taken away from it. So and I'm not talking about the any entertainment aspect. I'm speaking because I've enjoyed going and sitting in the back of a courtroom on other people's cases, because first and foremost, if I knew an attorney was going to be being the defense attorney and I was going to have that same attorney cross-examine me, I wanted to go and see that attorney and how that attorney acted. It would help me. I enjoy watching the jury's faces. When I'm involved in a case and I'm standing or sitting at the table, I have a tendency to really get drawn into the papers before me, what's on the table, talking to my prosecutor, and you kind of get lost into what's being said by one witness after another. So to be able to step back and watch as a spectator, I think is very educational. So I am for the camera being in the courtroom.
By the way, Scott, just saw Scott on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, but heard his voice first and just knew it was him. Was that you, Scott Duffey?
Yes. Yeah. So volume 2, episode 1.
Look at that. I had no idea, Scott Duffey. I'll have to check it out. That's on, I think it's on Netflix now. Skier Sarah, Nugs, the only one who gets more naps than Fil Waters. Nugget needs the rest. Nugget leaves landmines. Uh-oh. Ha, ha, ha.
No. Nugget is very well trained and housebroken. When she wants to go outside, she lets me know, and she goes outside and does her business, and then she comes back inside.
Look at this. Oh, my God. Did you all go to the barber together? Looking suave, sophisticated, and smart. All 3 of you. Nice of you to take the effort to look nice for us. Thank you. I love it. Look at this. Best guest ever this year goes to Fil Waters, not Scott Duffey, I guess, but we do. Fil Waters, June 27th, there's going to be an evidentiary hearing. What does that mean in English?
For the
evildoer.
Well, they're going to have an evidentiary hearing to see that. I'm sure the defense will try to suppress some of the evidence. So that's what the evidentiary hearing will be about. The prosecution will say, here's the evidence. This is why we have it. And the defense will be trying to suppress some of the evidence. They would do the same thing if they'd taken a statement from him that would be damaging in any way. They would be in there trying to suppress the statement. I've been through both of these kinds of hearings. There were many times where, look, 90% of my cases resulted in confessions or admissions that led to confessions. And there were many of them where the defense attorney tried to suppress those statements. So this is just a part of the process here now of seeing what the evidence is and the defense being able to address some of the issues they have with it.
By the way, we had Kerry Rawson, who is BTK's daughter, the infamous serial killer, and she was on the show this week, and she told us, because a lot of comparisons have been made, and she sees some and then doesn't see some, but it was interesting. Dennis Rader, BTK, he stood silent in court as well, and some people wondered if there's any correlation. Dom's mom, 7/25 is my son's birthday too. Great day I always loved my birthday in the middle of the summer, so thank you. Appreciate that. We will get to that. I saw another question. So moving on to some of the sort of tangible information that we got from this Dateline episode that people have been talking about, and some that's been revealed before. By the way, Phil, you've just been ousted. Scott Duffey, best guest ever, always the winner. So sorry, it was short-lived for you, Phil.
Well, that's the same person, so I think you made her feel guilty. We didn't want to have that. Was Teresa?
Yeah, look at that.
That's I don't take any offense. I'm glad to see that Scott is being held to the same standard that I am.
Phil, let me ask you a question. You're in Hawaii tonight. A person inadvertently cuts you off. Is the first thing you're doing looking for their license plate? Is that just how you were trained? Because right away you said this is the same person. So you obviously scanned the name and you remembered the name. So I'm wondering, like, your police instincts are always there. Are you looking at license plates when you're on the road?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think I've gotten beyond that. And I tell you what, when I was in my unmarked city car, when I was a homicide cop and some jackass did something in front of me, I'd pull them over. I'd turn the little red and blues on and pull them over. Of course, they're looking at me like I'm getting out of the car with my, tie on and my badge and pistol and all that. But there were just some people that were so egregious that I needed to remind them that quit driving like a freaking idiot around here. So, but I don't do that now. I just kind of, under my breath, somebody does something silly like that. I just, in Hawaii, it's just kind of like, okay.
People are a little more relaxed. But
it's probably, in fact, in Hawaii, what I frame with is that it's probably a tourist. So I kind of let them off the hook.
There you go. Kelly wouldn't want her kid to drive 3,500 miles. Don't care how old he is. Could be 53. She's driving him cross country. She's in Cleveland, Ohio. So thanks for watching, though, Kelly. We appreciate that. So on to some of the more pressing and interesting details, and then I promise we will move forward for the end of this episode. But Fil Waters, according to a single source on Dateline, Brian Kohberger, the evildoer, allegedly purchased a K-bar knife on the Amazon more than a year in advance, before he was even in Washington State or the state of Idaho. How critical a piece of information is that, if this is in fact true, according to this single source?
Well, if it's true, it's true. It just shows the link to the knife that was used, and the fact that, again, not a believer in coincidence, that if that did happen, number one, I'm sure it's been verified. or not verified by the detectives and the agents involved in that investigation. And if it did in fact happen, it will come out in the trial. So I think I don't know that I would necessarily call it a precursor for what happened, given what we know about his past, that he was interested in military stuff, law enforcement stuff, that kind of thing. I think it is probably going to be consistent with what his interests were. Now, who knows? Maybe back then he was thinking about some kind of an event like this, and this is what he was going to do. This is what he was going to use to further the act. But I think in the big scheme of things, it's just another piece in the puzzle.
Scott Duffey, what say you about this allegedly purchased K-bar knife on the Amazon? Obviously, that knife is critical. How important is that information, if it is true, to investigators?
Oh, it's a good piece to, and definitely feels right with regards to they probably already tracked it down. So I liken it to other things. If you are able to identify a murder weapon, so for example, if it's a gun and you have a 9mm or whatever caliber, and you're able to show that your suspect has that type of caliber weapon, but then all of a sudden can't come up with it, those are good things to know. For example, a weapon that's no longer in the household because it hasn't been reported, but now they say it's stolen. And so it's just another thing that law enforcement has to say, where's this weapon? Show us. I mean, because we're also looking at common sense. And so thereby, if I have a weapon and I no longer have that weapon, I should have a very good reason as to why I sold it. And then law enforcement should be able to track that down. I reported it stolen well before the crime, and law enforcement responded, etc. And so here you have this type of knife, the sheath, right, that's found, and so thereby really good indicator of the type of weapon that was used. And so now you have some information to show that it was purchased online, and where's the paperwork and where's that weapon? If that weapon was recovered and it has its own sheath, then law enforcement is able to say, we at least recovered the weapon or the knife that was purchased online, and it is not the knife that was used in the home. So there are things that law enforcement can take away from this for sure. But it's definitely something that law enforcement has tracked down and hopefully has a pretty good answer for.
To me, that was the biggest revelation in the show. Jody Johnston, Fil Waters, you say you don't believe in coincidence. The murders occurred at 1122 King Road on 1122. If you were investigating, would you be looking at these numbers? Would you bring in a numerologist?
No.
Do you care about the numbers?
No.
RDA, who the host? Just a dumb guy whose mom still yells at him in his 50s. That's all you need to know. Phil, there's another revelation that was some people knew about, but Dateline surfaced it, that apparently there was a woman that the evildoer at Washington State befriended in his program, and then apparently set up some sort of camera. She was concerned about break-ins, and he helped set up a camera. What does this tell you about the mindset, or just the high strangeness, as Art Bell would say? Some people suspect that he was watching her, even potentially on those cameras. Is this where he turned a little more dark or escalated potentially?
Well, I don't know. And since you've invoked Art Bell's name, I would imagine that he was probably into a little remote viewing. Would be my take. That was one of Art Bell's greatest qualities, I think, was his ability to remote view. But
for those who don't know, Art Bell is a legendary radio host of Coast to Coast AM, which is all about aliens, conspiracy theories, anything else. It's still on, now hosted by George Norrie. But anyway, go on, Phil.
Well, and I think, and I've said it repeatedly, that I do psychological autopsies on suspects and did them. And this would be part of that psychological autopsy because you want to know about this person. And this aspect of that was an interesting point on Dateline, as a matter of fact, about this installation of this camera system. And did he have, because he was as I understand it, I mean, he was interested in this part of law enforcement, the digital kind of stuff. And he appears to be some kind of one of these, digital computer geek kind of guys. So the question would be, did he look like he's, as a friend, he's installing this equipment, but then does he have the ability to view her from a separate location without her knowledge? So that would be part and parcel of the overall psychological autopsy of the evildoer.
Mary P., in my opinion, Scott Duffey, Brian Kohberger was being watched by law enforcement for a long time, which is why law enforcement called it targeted originally. Do you think BK possibly had a protective order against him that expired? That is my read as of today, could change. Do you agree with Mary P. here in any way?
It is a possibility. What we don't know is what we don't know. And so thereby leaves it up for speculation. I do remember them, saying early on that the community at large doesn't have to worry. When law enforcement typically says that when somebody is not immediately arrested, it does indicate that the suspect has achieved his goal, right? And so, for example, if it was a domestic and one spouse kills the other, then and they're looking for that spouse, it's generally speaking, it would be, hey, it's the community at large doesn't have to worry. So it's a very distinct possibility. I would imagine, though, not knowing Idaho law, I would imagine certain things the public could find. And so, for example, certain documents, if they've been served upon him, if he was served with a protective order, let's just say for argument's sake, there was a protective order and it was served on him, I think that information would already be able to have been out. So I've never heard anything of that. They obviously, in that being law enforcement, had information early on indicating something that probably going with regards to the type of brutality, that it was somebody who was close to the victims, right? Whether in his own mind or as opposed to like identifying him. I'm not so sure that law enforcement had him ID'd, like day one. I'm not so sure from what I've read in the affidavit that, and definitely in the affidavit, nothing's come out with regards to a protection from abuse order. So yeah, it's a good thought. I'm not so sure they knew and if I'm reading it, was she indicating that law enforcement had their eyes on him prior to the homicides, that,
I'm not sure.
I would venture no.
Diane McDonald, I always learn a lot from the guests on STS Nation, as do I, followed by Carrie G. Damn, Scott, showing up and showing out, looking good. People liking the shirt. Fofa Cat, the host is the one with the boring shirt. The host needs to take some fashion tips from. I just wear the old T-shirt. I'm trying to Mark Zuckerberg you guys, hoping that I get enough money to live like Phil and Scott. Teresa, hi from Ireland, STS Nation, Scott, Phil, and Joel. 2 more quick things on Kohberger, and then we will move on to a couple other things, and then we will let Phil go scratch his horse's chins, and Scott Duffey will go take his first surfing lesson. But Fil Waters, there was a woman interviewed in the Dateline piece that no one is talking about, and probably means nothing, but I thought it was a little interesting because everyone wonders who was the target in the Idaho 4 case. And this woman at DeSales University, she says that BK would look at her oddly, and they just chalked it up to BK being BK, but her name was Madison. And I'm wondering if he had some sort of weird attraction to blonde Madisons. Anything to that, or am I overthinking it, Fil Waters?
I think you're overthinking it. I mean, it's the same question as the 1122 question, right? I mean, sometimes
I just had a vision of Phil and I working a case together, sitting at a diner at 3 a.m, smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee. And I tell Phil,
I do neither one of the. No, that would be you. I do neither one of those things and never have.
Don't ruin my don't ruin my imagination. But we were sitting there, and I say to Fil Waters, I think Madison and 1122 is what connects this crime. And Phil says to me, "You're a moron. You know nothing. You're overthinking it."
I would never use such a harsh word.
The other thing, which I'll let both of you weigh in on. So there's body cam footage of a woman who I believe, I've not confirmed this yet, is a Washington State University, University of Idaho student at the time. She calls police about a year before, more than a year maybe before, saying that she had a little luggage roller in her car. The clothing was moved around and moved out, and she noticed her panties on the passenger side, just left there in like the side passenger, whatever you call that area. And if the math is correct, that is prior to Brian Kohberger being in Idaho or Washington. Does that, Fil Waters, give his defense something to play with now? Because who's doing this and why? It seems like a strange act. And if Brian Kohberger was in fact not in the area, then could it be somebody else?
I would say, given what we know in terms of what's been released as the evidence in this case, I think that's a nothing.
Nothing.
That's something that law enforcement would have to look into, simply because it was said. But to throw that in here as some sort of weird red herring that one event all of a sudden, I mean, there's just too many other pieces of evidence that we know about that tie him there. So the panty movement, I'm not sure there's much to that.
Lorna McKenzie became a YouTube member. Thank you very much. By the way, Scott Duffey, if you want to add to that, but also Brenda saying Dateline reported that BK's sister suspected him. Where did they get that information? Only Dateline knows that, but they did only cite a single source. And I'm sure, look, there's a lot of, for Dateline, there's a tremendous amount of money on the line with advertisers. And more importantly, their ethics and reputation. And they got nailed in the mid-90s for a story that they toyed around with. And I don't think they would go down that road again because it almost destroyed the network back then. But you would think that their source is strong, but we don't know. It's a single source, so you always have to be a little skeptical. But Scott Duffey, if this is true that his sister suspected him, would that surprise you?
No, just as you've had on the reporter before who goes out to his neighborhood, his own stomping grounds, and is able to talk to classmates. And so there's enough out there that shows that, hey, BK has a lot of oddities, right? And some social awkward behavior and this and that. And I've said it before, there are many people who suffer the same, call them ailments, call them whatever you want to call them, in today's day and age, who do absolutely nothing to harm another individual. So now you have 4 brutal homicides, and then you have a suspect, and now of course everybody's now putting all the pieces together, and there are lots of odd behaviors, right, of this individual. So it would not strike me that anybody close to him, including sisters, parents, and those who know him best, would always have a question mark in their head, right? There are a few people, I'm sure we all know, that say, if somebody were to cross the line and do something so bad, would you have, um, thought different about them, or no? I absolutely believe that people very close to him probably have, some belief that they realize it's not beyond my imagination that somebody like him would do that, right? And I'm speaking as if I was somebody close to him, and if I got to know him, I'd probably be able to say, hey, there were instances that made me question, and then they disappear until something major happens, right? So I I wouldn't put it past them. But I do agree, if the information's not readily out there, multiple sources, etc., you know, it's best left. Um, and I'm sure she's been, and many others have already been interviewed by law enforcement. And if they go on record and they say what they say, not just a hunch, but maybe some particular things said or done, then it will come out. Um, but I think there are many people that they're long, the outsiders are looking for ways to say, hey, this guy did it, and he has lots of a trail of breadcrumbs to show, and that's, I guess, the reality of where we are today, and trying to look at and say this guy has done something so drastic, and it's not out of the realm of possibility, right? That's ultimately what it comes down to when it comes to such a brutal homicide. That is somebody capable, and typically it's the monsters before us, as Phil and I've discussed before, you know, are among us, and there are those that do cross that line, and it's just reality of life of humanity.
Mm. Phil, the reality of life is that Kelly appears to not know what this is. Would you like to address this question on the screen? What's a bong?
Well, that's funny and good for her or he, if it's whatever
Could
it
be a
is,
he. Could be a he.
he or she, that they don't know what a bong is. That's a
Yep.
good thing.
That's a great thing. By the way, someone asked Phil, could someone go on a cross country? With your experience, let me rephrase the question. Do you think that the evildoer confessed anything to his father on that long road trip home, or is the impulse to speak?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It's possible he may have made some admissions to some things without fully confessing to it. Certainly possible. Um, but when he gets back to the house, I mean, I think it's documented that he's wearing plastic gloves and he's putting things in little baggies and throwing them. I mean, so I got to believe someone in that family thought if his behavior was weird before, this is really weird now based on what happened in Idaho. So possibility, certainly.
Jody Johnston, I'd like Scott to adopt me, although I'm probably older than he is. I'm 53. I'll leave that to you two. But now it's not just Phil. Way to go, Duffey, from Greg Duffey. Is this
This is a brother.
this is a
Right back
brother?
at you, Greg. So
Does Greg
tell
Duffey
him to hit the like button.
hit the like
right
button?
now.
Does Greg Duffey really have a long white beard, or is that just
Yes.
yeah?
No, it's probably even longer than that picture.
Wow. Greg Duffey, you got to come back more often and say hello. I love it. And tell us some Scott stories. Scott, I see beach behind you. Are you in Dewey, Rehoboth, Bethany, or Fenwick Island? These are all Delaware places. I know you're not Jersey. That's the shore. He is in Jersey, my home state. It's funny. Would you call it the Jersey Shore? Moving along here. By the way, can we get a Nugget update? Is she still asleep, Phil?
Nugget is resting peacefully.
Amazing. Okay, so we'll move along quickly. Looks like Phil's ready to go surfing in a few minutes. So, Phil, I have a question for you. Alec Murdaugh, he was just indicted on 22 new financial crimes while he's sitting in state prison. Here's my question, and it's open-ended. Why are people so greedy, Phil?
Well, I mean, for the same reasons I've given you before. So it's just that's the nature of people. I know that when I was working undercover in narcotics, the greed factor was what always got these people caught. So the promises of ill-gotten gains, the promises of money, the promises of future things regarding material toys and that kind of thing. I mean, that's the nature of people. And there are some that means more to than others. So it's just a kind of a quality that I've had friends of mine that I would consider greedy. Then I've had others that were very benevolent, and that just the greed stuff just never really entered their mind. And of course, we need to consider too that the word greed could bring in a whole lot of different aspects about what people are greedy about or for.
And then the other thing that's interesting is that, he called 911 when one of the many bodies that piled up around him, one of them was his housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield. When he called 911, Scott Duffey, he said that she was tripped by the dogs and fell down the stairs. Well, now he's coming out and saying they weren't the dogs. It's just strange. But he's not the kind of guy that has any credibility, right? So what are you supposed to believe? And does that need to be investigated now to see if it was in fact a homicide?
Yeah, and if I remember, they have reopened or are looking to reopen cases that otherwise were not deemed homicide or something.
Yes. Stephen Smith's the big one. That was a hit and run, which they are now SLED is reinvestigating as a homicide, and that's just been lagging on too. But yes, you're right.
Yeah, and if I'm correct, there was reports of how much he made, and early on, her sons reported not receiving the money. They later found out was an insurance payout, and that he ended up. So again, going into this greed, not that one necessarily precipitates the other, but it seems there's a lot of information that's come out now to show there was this history, murder and tremendous greed. So there, he hit quite a few on the marker there for why kill somebody and then benefit. So it will be interesting to see what evidence now that could still be determined with, it's a couple of years. I'm not sure exactly when she passed, but I think the years, time is not their friend, right? Time is definitely not their friend when something has gone by and the crime scene is no longer there. So if they do reopen it, if it hasn't already been reopened, it would be interesting to see what in fact they're able to determine her true cause of death.
Kelly Visor, I'm not sure which way to pronounce it, who just asked what a bong is, also says 7/25, my birthday is my mom's birthday. Happy birthday, Mom, even though it's a bit away. She will be a young 85, acts like she's 35. She has more energy than I. Should introduce her to my mom, but you should ask her what a bong is. She might know. Followed by Melissa, hi, SGS Nation. Phil, there's another story in the news today, and I'll tell you why this interested me. The so-called family feud murder. Becky Bleefnick, if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, she was a 41-year-old Illinois nurse found murdered in her own home. She told her sister via text, if something ever happens to me, make sure the number one person of interest is Tim. That is her husband. And she said, I am putting this in writing that I am fearful he will somehow harm me, come after me, or will try to do something to me that takes me away from the kids or the kids away from me. He already has lied multiple times to point himself as a victim and me as the perpetrator when it is absolutely the other way around. Phil, they were going through a bitter divorce. She was shot 14 times after a breakthrough in the home through a second-story window. What interests me about this case, aside from an innocent young woman was murdered in the prime of her life, is this guy, Timothy Bleefnick, was on Family Feud with Steve Harvey. And Steve Harvey, and I'm paraphrasing now, asked him, what's something along the lines of what's the dumbest thing you've ever done in your life? And this guy responded saying, I do. And it's, what's with game shows, man? I know this is now the third person I know who's been on a game show who's involved in murders. I guess that's a question in and of itself. But again, Phil, why do they murder their spouses and not just get a divorce? Why shoot her 14 times, Phil?
Is he in custody? I'm not familiar with this.
There's a trial going on right now.
Oh, the trial is going on right now.
Yes, and by all means, he is going to be convicted and spending the rest of his life in prison. The kids will be somewhat orphaned because of that. But again, what is going on here, Phil?
Well, it just goes back to the further destruction of the family. I mean, people get together and we got to understand that love and hate are both sides of the same coin. And they are very, very focused, and they're very strong, both of those emotions. So I know when I've talked to suspects who have done this to their spouse, that the problem becomes that certain things occur during that marriage that cause it to deteriorate. And whether it's, and I'm not picking sides, whether it's husband or wife, I've seen both, so if you've got a person who is overly controlling or jealous or envious in some way of their spouse, and they have now, all of those qualities that they loved have now become those qualities that they now hate. And so the focus becomes different. Why don't they just get a divorce? Sometimes that hate wells up to the point where the only way that they can be satiated in any way is to remove them from their lives and the planet permanently. And it just goes back to what I have always said. Anyone is capable of any act under the right set of circumstances. And these people find themselves in those circumstances, and the collateral damage and the consequences of what they've done to their spouse, they don't even consider. And in terms of how it affects children and other family members and so forth and so on, because I believe that in their mind, they think they are not only ridding the problem for themselves, but they have somehow conjured up this idea that they are the same problem for the other family members and the children, and they're going to protect them from this spouse. So therefore, the only way they can do that in a permanent way is to remove them from the face of the planet. And when you see something like this, where this guy, from what you just said, goes into a second floor window, I think you said, and then shoots her 14 times.
14 times.
What is his thought? He's trying to make this look like a burglary gone wrong. Well,
break-in, I suppose. Yes.
Or a suicide where she, killed herself 14 times. I mean, it's unfathomable. It's evil in the world, and I've always wondered in those situations, why not just go? Because, well, the other thing is you go back to the greed factor too. So in a divorce, somebody's going to lose some money. So here we go. Now we're to the point where we don't want to lose that money. So everything that we have earned, everything that we've worked hard to obtain, all these material possessions, is now going to be, at least half of it is going to be taken from us. And we don't want that to happen either, because in the mind of these people that do this, that spouse doesn't deserve these things. I worked hard for this stuff. They didn't.
Phil, there's once a thing called mutual assured destruction, or MAD. And that was the idea that everyone, the U.S. and the USSR had nuclear weapons. And so it was a deterrent. Anytime that I would consider even yelling at my wife, I think of what life in prison would be like. And I'm immediately put in my place, and I just go and watch a Dateline episode to calm myself down. But I guess other people don't think about life in prison. I would not do well there. Look at this. We've got a shirt off going on. Catherine, Scott's shirt is the best, so now Phil will have to outdo him. However, look at this, Phil. Former Houstonian, too, and always admired Fil Waters. My dad was an attorney in H-Town and saw Phil in action. Love to know who your father is, Lauren.
Yeah, I'd like to know who your father is, Lauren.
Yeah, and I'd like to
thank you for the compliment. Thank you.
I'd like to hear Phil's stories, if at all possible. Hello, Joel, and all your amazing guests. So let's leave on another feel-good story here. Dharmesh Patel, Scott Duffey. He has pleaded not guilty, and I'll tell you why this story piqued my interest. He has pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of attempted murder. He's in custody without bail. A preliminary hearing is scheduled for June 12th, at which time a judge will decide if there is enough evidence to move ahead with the trial. He drove his family off a cliff. He's a physician. He's a doctor in the Pasadena area. They were in their Tesla. Now, his wife said that he purposely drove them off the cliff. There is video of this. If you guys have not seen this, Google this. How they all survived and are okay, I have no idea. It was like 350 feet straight down, but they all survived. The wife said that he purposely drove the car off. Now she is kind of going back on that, saying that it's not necessarily the case. He has maintained that it was a problem with the brakes. She also said he was severely depressed. Scott Duffey, first of all, how do you survive? Those Teslas must be built well, Scott Duffey, because if you see this fall, it's insane. But are we at a point in investigations where they will be able to go and look at this mangled Tesla, or go through Bluetooth or whatever they need to do to find out if there was some sort of brake malfunction and come to the bottom of this?
Oh, definitely. They'll be able to reconstruct that car. So I'm sure they have the best of the best, including people from Tesla, to be able to go over that car, to first of all determine that the car did not malfunction. Um, and I would venture to say, not knowing enough of this story yet, but I would venture to say they would have held off charges until they had all that in place, which would tell me if the charges are in place, they had
Well, I think
plenty
it's
of
because
other.
the wife said, and I quote, to police, this is a direct quote, "He's depressed, he's a doctor, he said he was gonna drive off the cliff, he purposely drove off the cliff."
Yeah. So
Um,
it was going to be a murder suicide. That's the way I take it. Everybody everybody survives. Thank God for that. But so now you have no different than bang bang, I'm gonna shoot you, Joel and Phil, and you don't die, and I run, and then the police come and say, who shot you? Scott did. So no different here. The weapon was a vehicle going off a cliff, and sorry, I love you, I failed you all, and whatever it is, and we'll all see each other as he drives off the cliff, and now all of a sudden everybody survives. So the surviving witness is the one that points the finger and said this was intentional, and so thereby, you know, murder suicide averted.
Phil Waters, my final question to you, and then we will get final thoughts. Why not just drive off the cliff himself if he's suicidal and depressed? Why would he have to take his children and his wife with him?
Well, because he wants everybody to share in his misery. I mean, I've worked these murder suicides, and it's a tragic scene. And the perpetrators of these types of events, again, they just want everyone to share in their misery, and they're going to take everybody out that they can take out, because many times they're going to look at this as being the either they perceive that they can no longer provide for their families, and therefore they're going to protect them by killing them, or they are envious and they're not going to allow their families to participate in anything that may bring joy to them. So therefore, I'm going to share my misery by killing them. So it's these are horrible. I've worked several of these things, and infanticides, and parents killing their children, and children killing their parents. I mean, these things that are so interpersonal, it is just it's very, very disturbing.
Very well said, Phil. Sarah responds to that story. Yikes! I'm never getting back into a relationship. And if you do, make sure that the significant other is never on the Family Feud.
Just don't meet him over the interwebs. That's the only
website. Yeah. Candy Temple, that family had an angel on their shoulders that day. That's incredible. It's when you see this video, you will not believe that they survived.
Well, I think Tesla has one of the highest safety ratings of any vehicle on the road, if I'm not mistaken.
Phil, you might not have been so lucky if you were in that 1984 Magnum PI Ferrari of yours.
Oh no, that would have that would have been a disaster.
Yeah. No,
that would have been a disaster.
I have to say, everyone, this is my favorite day of the week. I love hanging out with Phil and Scott and all of you. I don't have to say it again. Fil Waters is America's most respected detective. He's worked for 1,000 years, gotten 10 million confessions. Scott Duffey has worked for 500 years and has gotten 9 million confessions and got a lot of drugs off the street. Fil Waters, are you going for pizza tonight?
No. Pizza night has been traditionally on Friday nights.
Yeah, that's why I asked. Isn't it Friday?
Right? But we will be attending our Bible study, our regular Bible study over here on Friday. So pizza night has been shifted to Saturday nights.
I'm wishing you a very good pizza night. Scott Duffey, you already told us Tito's vodka. Do you drink it straight on the rocks with soda? What's your preference?
So I was turned on to this drink called a transfusion. So it's
Sounds
great.
serious.
Yeah.
What is it?
So ice, Tito's, grape juice, a touch of lime, and a dash of Sprite or 7-Up or ginger ale, whichever one of those.
That's interesting. If I went to a bartender in Miami and said, "Could you make me a transfusion?" would they know what it is?
Should. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I just don't want to let go. I love these guys. Sarah B, such a fun podcast. The guests are always brilliant and fun as well. Thanks for being the super host, Joel. The thing I'm most disappointed about, Nugget did not wake up for this at all. Did she?
She's sacked out. She's had a busy morning. So
She's had a rough day.
She's sacked out.
Do the horses like Nugget?
Nugget doesn't get around the horses. She's a smart dog. It's a smart dog. She doesn't get around the horses. I don't think the horses have an opinion about her either way.
Look at the chief technical officer now. Say goodbye. Has someone you think? Well, is this English? Am I reading this? Am I just so tired on a Friday? Anyway, if you guys know a best guest, or a story you'd like us to cover, please email the team. Look, she took it down. She's embarrassed. I'm going to make fun of her. Chief technical officer with grammatical mistakes. She's very smart, by the way. Sarah says Bloody Marys all day long. Quick programming note. Joran van der Sloot is coming. Do you have someone you think? She changed it. Who qualifies as a best guest? Is there a story you'd like us to cover? Email the STS team, survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com. There you go. He is supposed to be extradited as soon as Tuesday. There goes my dog Ethel barking. That's why I'm moving to a studio. But anyway, long story short, he's supposed to be extradited as soon as Tuesday. And this Monday we have Cheryl Mack McCollum coming on, who traveled to Aruba with Nancy Grace and Beth Holloway to report and work on that story. She is a crime scene investigator from the Atlanta PD. She'll be here along with John Delatorre, a psychologist, who's going to give us a window into the craziness that is Joran van der Sloot. Until then, wishing everyone a very thoughtful, relaxing Memorial Day weekend. Have a great time. Be safe. Don't get near any sharks. Love you, America. Love you, Hawaii. Love you, Jersey, the Jersey Shore. And love you, everyone in between. Till next time.
Aloha.
Aloha.